Hi, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Anne Wintrow with the AT&T Foundation, and I am so pleased to be joined by this incredible panel of experts and practitioners to share thoughts, reflections, and best practices with regard to battling the digital divide and the homework gap. This has, of course, been such a remarkable year for education all across the globe. Here in the US, we now understand that as many as 12 million students are trapped in the midst of the homework gap and of the digital divide, lacking either connectivity or devices or access to high quality education and digital literacy experiences. Since schools shut down in March, AT&T has been doing all that we can to help these students, initially launching a 10 million distance learning family connections fund to help to help scale the best learning resources for students, teachers, and families everywhere. And recently, working with Connected Nation, which we'll hear more about shortly, to reach 3 million of our country's most vulnerable students, those that we understand to be most likely to have been just simply missing from the education system since March. Those students experiencing homelessness in the foster care system with disabilities and from immigrant families. So I am so pleased to be here today to share insights on programs like those and insights from these incredible leaders in education and once again in battling the digital divide. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves. We are joined by Brent Legg with Connected Nation, by Joanna Smith with All Here, and by Hee-Jae Lim from Talking Points. Brent, why don't you first introduce yourself?
Hello, Anne, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Brent Legg. I'm the Executive Vice President for Government Affairs at Connected Nation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's focused on closing the digital divide across the United States. We've had the privilege of working with AT&T on projects similar to the one that I'll talk to you about today for a number of years, and we are really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Hey everyone, and thanks so much for having me on this panel. My name is Joanna Smith, and I'm the CEO of All Here. All Here is an edtech platform that had the fortune of going through AT&T's 2019 Aspire cohort, and we foster student success and engagement through a focus on absenteeism using texting that is powered by AI. So specifically, we create chatbots that support families and kids on their paths to and through school. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Anne and AT&T, for having me here. So I'm Hee-Jae Lim. I'm the founder and CEO of Talking Points. And Talking Points is an education technology nonprofit that AT&T has supported since 2016. Gosh, that's a long time ago. And our mission is to unlock the potential of families in supporting their children's learning. And we do that through accessible technology with a special focus on underserved and multilingual communities. And the way that we do that is by building a multilingual family engagement platform that allows schools, districts, and teachers to communicate with families in their own languages using web, mobile, and text messages as well.
Great, thank you all so much. Brent, why don't we start with you? You know, Connected Nation has long been devoted to connecting communities and schools and different systems. So I think there's no better organization and no better thinker on the digital divide to just share insights and really ground us in the extent of both the challenge and the opportunity for solutions.
Absolutely, Anne. So one of the areas of focus that our organization has had since we were founded 20 years ago, this month actually, is on quantifying the digital divide. Unfortunately, the data that the federal government collects has historically not been very accurate in terms of quantifying the extent of the digital divide. And when we think of digital divide, we really think about it in terms of three different veins. So one is just lack of access to infrastructure. And we think that there are somewhere between 20 and 25 million households in the United States that do not have access to even the most basic form of broadband infrastructure. And then the second piece, of course, is the adoption of that service. Many families across the United States simply can't afford to adopt broadband into the home. And so that's one of that's the primary focus of the AT&T Homework Gap program that I'll talk about a little bit later today, is bringing access to the homes of at-risk students that wouldn't be able to access the internet in another way. And then the third vein that we focus on is on the youth broadband, the meaningful use of technology. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has been, it has been essential for the internet to provide virtual instruction to nearly every public school district across the country. And yet we know that there are many families and students specifically that haven't been able to connect, haven't been able to be part of formal instruction since the pandemic began, and really in earnest in March of last year. And so we're focusing on all three of those areas. If we think about the students that are disconnected from formal learning opportunities, that's been quantified at about 16.9 million students nationally that haven't had access off campus to be able to regularly and routinely participate in formal learning opportunities. And that's a massive number. Students are living now years of instruction and formal education, and that's going to be something that our society is going to have to grapple with now moving forward, in how we respond and try to bring everyone back up to the same level. So we're thrilled to be administering a program for AT&T that is directly addressing that very need.
As are we, Brent. And I think the number that I initially cited, 12 million, had just made headlines this week. And I was so pleased and proud to see that, going from the 16.9 to 12, that there has been progress. Is that something, that you're seeing as well? And are you optimistic about that trajectory continuing?
I think that I am very optimistic that government is finally looking at addressing this issue in earnest. There are several pieces of legislation that members of Congress have introduced over the past couple of weeks as the new Congress has come into session that directly deal with the homework gap. The Federal Communications Commission is actively working to try to expand the federal E-rate program, to expand that program to serve students at home, off campus. So I'm very optimistic that that number is coming down. I'm also excited about the efforts that are being made to do a better job of quantifying that number so that we have truly reliable data on which to make better public policy moving forward. And so that if we're ever faced with another pandemic again, that we no longer have to rely on potentially faulty data in order to make good policy decisions that make sure that kids don't fall in the cracks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Joanna and Hijay, you both in the organizations that you founded and lead are so dedicated, have always been so dedicated to making sure that kids don't fall through the cracks. And Joanna, I'm really curious to hear your insights as well with regard to absenteeism. All here was focused on chronic absenteeism before the pandemic, and obviously that means something very different now that we truly understand the scale. So, I think we would all really benefit from hearing about what you've learned about chronic absenteeism and how we can, collectively prevent that from growing and hopefully, battle that and bring those numbers back down.
Absolutely, and sure. So pre-COVID, about 8 million students missed about a month or more of school. And that's what we come to know as chronic absence. And just for folks who may be listening on the call, when we think about chronic absenteeism, it doesn't matter the reason for the absence. We're really just taking into account that class time has been missed for whatever reason. One of the things to keep in mind that with COVID is that the number and the extent of students who are experiencing issues with chronic absenteeism has dramatically increased. So pre-COVID, it was 8. Now, some of the most conservative estimates will put that count up to 25 million youth who somehow have become disengaged from learning, whether that learning is measured by logging on to the Zoom or Teams, or actually completing coursework, or staying in contact with a caring adult from a school. And in that context, I think that what's become really important is being able to understand at scale, but also at an individual level, the kinds of challenges and the kinds of barriers that families and kids might be facing. Pre-COVID, schools would typically rely on being able to do that through face-to-face conversations or visiting a student's home, a family's home, doing things even as creative as a walking school bus, where a band of people from a single neighborhood marches with kids to a school, but in an environment where approximately at least half of our client base of about 7,500 individual schools is on campus, but the other half is either remote or hybrid. A lot of the tools that educators would typically have at their disposal to probe the reasons why students are chronically absent are off of the table. For example, there's no family who wants you to come and visit their house during COVID, even for the most beloved of schools, right? So for us, I think it's important to understand at scale and an individual level the kinds of barriers that families are facing. And to the extent where we've been able to use AI and use chatbots to build an empathy engine to have those meaningful conversations at scale, but in a way that's still respectful of educator time, we're learning that, as well as using that in the service of having an impact on equity and having an impact on student outcomes. The other thing I'll add here is that the sheer number of families who will text the bot saying that, like, I don't have access to a Wi-Fi, or my internet has been turned off for 3 or more days because I can't afford to pay the bill. It's overwhelming, and it places and shines a harsh light on the criticality of addressing this challenge to ensure that every student has the opportunity to learn from wherever they physically might be.
Absolutely, Joanne. I think we all now truly understand that connectivity is the new pen and paper, and just how vital it is for students everywhere. And Hijay, I think Talking Points was so ahead of the game in recognizing that parent engagement needs to, in many cases, needs to be something different than going to somebody's home, right? I mean, you figured out how to use SMS to scale meaningful parent engagement years ago and have been building this incredible tool since. So I think, we'd love to hear what you are seeing and learning in parental engagement, and how the COVID pandemic has shifted that paradigm as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and to your point, we've been thinking about family engagement and building family and teacher relationships in the way that, learning doesn't stop when you leave the school grounds. Children are at home or outside school 85% of their time, if you include summers and sleeping time. So, how can we make the most out of the 85% of time spent at school? And COVID-19 pandemic has meant that time is actually 100% for many students. So building relationships between parents and families, caregivers, and educators in schools has become even more critical during distance learning environments, whether that would be information around homework, accessibility, device access at home, all the way to something really simple, basic needs like meals. One spring, when spring COVID hit and a lot of the schools started shutting down, we started hearing from our partners in schools and districts, and 89% of our school partners are Title I eligible. About 70% are qualifying for free reduced lunch. So what that meant was when kids were sent home, they had no idea of and no way of communicating whether meals should be picked up. So, and then if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of if the students aren't eating, they're definitely not learning. So we started kind of reimagining the role of schools and districts as community centers who are providing a lot of basic needs, human services, including information to how to access Wi-Fi or where does device distribution occur and so on. So we just saw the incredible role of schools in having played a role in, providing basic services in addition to learning, and how that stretched and really kind of put a high pressure on school systems when COVID-19 hit. Not to even mention COVID-19 related health information that they were delivering to schools and families and educators and students, unemployment benefits, social services. So I think all this is to say, what we learned was, the problem around, homework gap, device and Wi-Fi accessibility is much, much, much more than learning, which of course is incredibly important, but it is also around equity to information to be able to access services that they might desperately need, including food.
And Brent, I think, we've started talking about the extent of the digital divide and the homework gap challenge at scale across the US. I think we'd really value hearing what you're seeing at the statewide or at the local level, programs that are working, or states that are more significantly challenged, given your purview. We'd love that insight.
Absolutely. Well, one of our partner organizations, Digital Bridge K-12, which was born out of some work from an organization called Education Superhighway, has really started building a platform of tools for state and school district leaders to essentially quantify the extent of the digital divide at the school district level by developing a map that pairs anonymized student household addresses with broadband service provider availability information, so that school districts can quantify which students have access to infrastructure but don't have access to or aren't subscribing to service. And so they've developed a means of collecting data via the school district's SMS or student learning management system to assess the level of connectivity among student households, apply that information to the map, and figure out which service providers are capable of servicing given households, which is a missing link, right, between school districts and the service provider community and assessing the need at home to actually supply the service. So what this is going to do essentially is allow school districts to bulk purchase services to deliver service to homes that don't have it. And then to be able to quantify the students that don't have access to any sort of broadband infrastructure at all, so that other provisions can be made for them. The Texas Education Agency has also launched a statewide program in a very similar way to quantify the extent of the digital divide among students and to work with the legislature, which is in session right now. The Texas legislature is only in session every 2 years. So it's a really critical time to work with the legislature to identify funding support to address those students that have been identified as not having a connection in the home. So we're excited about the work that the Texas Education Agency is doing, and the broadband provider community has been very much a part of that initiative as well. So we're really excited that everyone seems to be coming together to find solutions to both quantify the problem and then address the problem. And I know not just Texas, a number of states have similar initiatives. And we're also excited again about what Congress may do here in the near term to address this issue nationally.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're seeing across so many sectors the potential for really meaningful collaborations as a result of, pardon me, this pandemic. And so along those lines, I'd like to just slightly shift the lens of this conversation. You know, Joanna and Hije, you both are entrepreneurs and you were running, organizations and going through incredible growth before the pandemic. I'm sure there are many entrepreneurs watching this today. And I think, we'd all love to hear how this pandemic has perhaps shifted your business, has accelerated growth, has created new challenges and opportunities. Hije, I'll start with you, but we'd love to hear those insights.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So all of the above that you mentioned, Anne. To give you an example, when March COVID hit and everything started shutting down, we started seeing about 8 to 10 times the normal communication volume on talking points. All of a sudden. So you can imagine the pressures that put on our software infrastructure, our team, and so on. And then the number of teachers coming to talking points increased by 20 to 30x compared to the high days of what we call the back to school period. And then we had partners calling us, I don't know how they got my phone number, but it's somehow out there. So they started calling me saying, you need to be able to open this up to all schools within the district because literally kids are starving. They're not able to get any information around meal service. So we then made the quick decision within a week to open up talking points for schools and districts at no charge. Thanks to philanthropic support like AT&T. Normally we charge a at-cost fee to be able to kind of fund our operating costs. So we opened that initiative up to Title I schools and districts, and it allowed us to expand our reach from 500,000 families to 1.3 million. So we tripled in 2-3 months. And to give you a sense, the organization has been around for about 5 years at that point. So that happened. And then we also shifted our kind of wraparound supports, resources, and content that we give to educators and schools and parents all around virtual distance learning and kind of the mental health impacts that might have on our communities as well. So I think within a span of 3 months, the team went completely remote. We were dealing with 10 to 20x to 50x, however you quantify it, the volume, the pressures on the system, and shifted some of our product and program development. And then had to accelerate a lot of our engineering and infrastructural work to support a lot of that scale. And that happened again last fall, although we somewhat were prepared for it. We doubled again in the last quarter of 2020, kind of ended the year having reached 3 million families, and that is still growing. So I think in service of that, recruiting and scaling our team, processes, and systems had been top of mind as an entrepreneur, and being able to scale the resources to support the kind of the fast pull of the demand and the need out there. But, I think my learning and the silver lining of all of this is our moment. Family engagement has become even more critical, urgent, and important. It is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity in one of our principles' words. So really grateful as a silver lining and optimistic for what's to come next.
Yeah, thank you, Hije. I share that. And Joanna, similarly, we'd love to hear what you've seen and learn and how All Here has grown in the past almost year.
Sure. So one of there was certainly a paradigm shift. I think that when looking at in the field of interventions as a whole, there tends to be an emphasis on solutions that are research based, but that can also quickly take up a lion's share of an educator's time, whether that's a teacher, social worker, counselor, nurse. And I think the biggest shift that we had to make was realizing that the problem that we are committed to helping to solve exploded and increased dramatically, but the capacity of those educators did not. I think that there are numerous examples nationally of educators who have adapted geniusly to circumstances that we didn't anticipate as a field. But I think our clients' requirements changed. It became much more important for interventions to be scalable, but still personalized, and making sure that every interaction could be relevant to a particular student's situation. We also see client needs shift to become more conversational. So in thinking about how text could be used, and especially through the perspective and lens of automation, tailoring language to students, but without judging them. And attendance can be really judgy of a space. We also found that for students and families, it's that convenience is super important. So for students and parents, being able to get 24/7 help on their preferred device is very important. And that is a huge shift, because so much of how districts and schools are set up to support families and students are all around what can be done during regular school hours. And if students are learning from home en masse, well, what does that mean if someone has a question on a Saturday, or 1 a.m. in the morning, or 8:30 p.m. at night? And having served as a former teacher myself, I can tell you there are no educators who want their phones to be ringing at that hour of the evening. So it placed a demand in terms of what it would mean for supporting students and supporting families to be able to do that in a way that was personalized, conversational, and convenient, but also student-centric in a way that could be scaled. So a lot of what we've seen during COVID is a receptivity to innovating around how we design for the needs of families, and how we design for the needs of students in order to accomplish those aims. And using the example of a student or a family struggling with regard to access to hardware, devices, or high-speed Wi-Fi, it's so draining on the capacity of an educator, a counselor, a social worker to have those one-to-one conversations. It absolutely was so pre-COVID, but now, like, trying to chase folks down, look under every rock, and see what might be keeping students from being engaged could quickly lead to burnout for the most committed and educator. And what I'm so thankful for what we've been able to do at All Here is, one, understand what student-centric and family-centric now looks like, design around that, and then focus on scaling that with an emphasis on making the lives of educators just a little easier, while providing a line of sight into what families and students might be needing. So I think for us, the big shift has been around, like, keeping that sense of empathy so that we can stay attuned to what requirements are from our clients as well as from families and kids, and then use that to make sure that we're providing the most value possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm so heartened to hear optimism threaded through how each of you are, sharing your responses to this pandemic. Why don't we do, to close this off, a super quick round robin of things that you are most excited about as we move into this next phase of education? 5 words or less. Can I start with you, Brent?
Wow, 5 words or less. Well, I don't know if I can do that, but I'll certainly say that we're super excited about this program that AT&T is launching with us to provide 35,000 mobile Wi-Fi hotspots to at-risk students across the country. We're going to be rolling that out here in the next few weeks. We're excited about what that means, and we hope that this will be a great example for others to follow to address this need until there's some larger public policy way that we can address the homework gap.
Cheers to that. Hee-Jae.
Okay, I'm gonna try to stay within 5 words. Parent-teacher relationships ever more important. Yes.
Beautiful. Joanna.
Awesome. I will have to work on those skills of being that concise, but I'll make it short still. We have to safely reopen schools, but I'm most excited that the goal seems to not be returning to normal, and folks are committed to not only fostering innovation, but also learning from it.
Excellent. Well, Brent, Joanna, Hee-Jae, thank you all so much for sharing your expertise and insights, and thank you to everybody for watching. Be well.